Before we begin, like the video and tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? The sickness didn't start with pain. It started with a smell, a sweet, cloying rot that seeped from a soldier's own flesh. In the sodden jungles of Vietnam, a scratch from a thorn, a leech bite, or a blister from soaked boots could fester into a creeping horror called jungle rot, a necrotizing bacterial infection that could eat through skin and muscle down to the bone. In American field hospitals, the protocol was clear, clinical, and issued from the top, a regimen of powerful, expensive antibiotics like penicillin and tetracycline, shipped in from the vast medical industrial complex. It was a war of chemistry against infection. Now cut to an Australian fire support base. A digger, his feet a swollen, weeping mess after a week-long patrol, sits on an ammo crate. His medic isn't holding a syringe. He's handing him 2 ice-cold cans of Foster's Lager from the unit's official ration. One is to drink. The other is about to be poured over the rotting wounds on his feet. To a visiting U.S. medical officer, this scene was medical heresy, a dangerous lapse in protocol bordering on malpractice. Beer wasn't medicine, it was a vice. But what the Americans saw as a shocking lack of proper care was in reality the application of a different, brutally pragmatic science, a frontline wisdom forged in the mud of 2 world wars and the jungles of Malaya. This is the story of a fundamental clash in military medicine. It's the story of how the Australian Army, facing a terrifying and pervasive enemy in jungle rot, deployed a humble, ice-cold weapon from their ration packs, while the world's greatest superpower fought the same enemy with pills from headquarters. The question wasn't just about treatment, it was a question of philosophy. Do you trust the system, or do you trust the soldier? This divide was rooted in a profound clash of medical and cultural philosophies. The American approach was a masterpiece of 20th-century military logistics. It reflected a belief in technological and pharmaceutical supremacy. Disease was a biological enemy to be annihilated with the latest scientific weapons. The system was centralized, standardized, and immense. Antibiotics were deployed like artillery, a massive, broad-spectrum barrage against infection. This was effective, but it was also fragile. It depended on unbroken supply chains, sterile conditions for injections, and correct diagnosis. In the remote, rain-soaked mangroves of Phuoc Tui, those chains could break, medicine could run out, and for the common grunt, a shot often meant a trip to a rear-area medic, taking him off the line. The Australian philosophy was born not in a laboratory, but in the trenches of Gallipoli and the jungles of New Guinea, themselves hellscapes of disease. It was a doctrine of frontline pragmatism. The core tenet was simple. The best medicine is the medicine you have, right now, that keeps you fighting. They couldn't always rely on a perfect air-conditioned supply chain for sophisticated drugs. They had to adapt. From this reality emerged the multifunctional role of the beer ration. It wasn't just for drinking. In the Australian digger's manual of fieldcraft, a can of lager was a tool. The science, while crude, had a basis in desperate logic. The alcohol in the beer, typically around 5% ABV, acted as a rudimentary antiseptic. Pouring it over a superficial fungal infection or an early-stage tropical ulcer provided a cleansing burn, washing away grime and killing some surface bacteria. The sugar content, while not ideal, could create a temporarily hostile environment for some bacteria. But the true genius of the beer treatment was psychological and social. The process was a ritual. A soldier would be told to sit, drink 1 beer to take the edge off the pain and the stress, while the medic used the second to clean his wounds. This wasn't a cold clinical procedure in a tent, it was a communal act of care. It addressed the soldier's morale as directly as his infection. Stress and exhaustion suppressed the immune system. The brief, sanctioned relaxation with a mate and a medic, the cold liquid in a stifling climate, provided a tangible boost. A soldier treated this way felt cared for on a human level, not just processed as a medical case. He was more likely to report the early signs of rot and more likely to take the time to dry his feet afterwards, the single most important preventative measure. The efficacy of this system was proven in the relentless day-to-day grind of operations. Consider the experience of a rifle company from 6 ARR during the monsoon season of 1967. Constant patrols through flooded paddies and streams made jungle rot an epidemic. The American advisors attached to the unit watched in confusion as the Australian medics, after dispensing a limited supply of official ointment, would break out cases of beer for the worst cases. The Americans predicted a crisis, yet the company's casualty reports from disease told a different story. While there were serious infections, the rate of debilitating rot that required evacuation was remarkably low. The beer wasn't curing advanced necrotizing fasciitis. Nothing but heavy antibiotics and surgery could do that. What it was doing was managing the problem at the threshold. It provided an immediate, accessible intervention that cleaned early wounds and, crucially, encouraged soldiers to come forward for care without fear of a punitive or impersonal medical process. It kept minor infections from becoming major ones, and it kept men with manageable cases on duty in the field. The Viet Cong and local villagers, observant of everything, took note of this strange ritual. While they feared Australian combat prowess, they also noted the informal, almost casual way the diggers dealt with hardship. The sight of soldiers sharing a beer while tending to each other's feet reinforced a foreign but perceptible ethos of mutual care that stood in stark contrast to the more impersonal technological face of the American war machine. The American reaction evolved from disdain to a begrudging tactical curiosity. Official medical reports continued to condemn the practice as unsanitary and inadequate, but in the field, some junior officers and medics saw the results. They witnessed Australian units maintaining high in-field strength despite horrific conditions. They began to understand that the beer was not the antibiotic, but the delivery system for care. It was the hook that brought the soldier into a preventative healthcare routine. A U.S. Army report from an advisor in 1968 quietly noted, "The Australian use of beer as a topical antiseptic and psychological motivator for foot care, while unorthodox, appears to contribute to higher rates of early self-reporting and lower incidence of severe fungal casualties in their infantry companies. The communal aspect of the practice should be studied for its morale and compliance benefits." It was a tacit admission that the diggers, with their warm beer, had stumbled onto a profound truth. Treating the soldier's spirit was sometimes the first step to treating his flesh. The story of the beer ration versus the antibiotic is more than a medical anecdote. It is a parable about two approaches to an intractable problem. The American method was vertical, a solution developed at the top and shipped down through a perfect system. The Australian method was horizontal, a solution shared among mates, born from shared suffering and immediate necessity. One trusted the institution's pharmacy, the other trusted the digger's ingenuity and the unit's cohesion. The beer didn't win a medical debate, it won a psychological one. It recognized that in the awful, decaying grind of jungle warfare, the will to stay in the fight was the most critical resource of all. By offering a moment of cold relief, a spark of camaraderie, and a tangible, immediate action against the creeping rot, it preserved that will. The Americans fought jungle rot with chemistry, the Australians fought it with culture, and in the sticky, fevered hell of the Vietnamese jungle, culture proved to be a formidable medicine. If you find these stories of frontline ingenuity compelling, do us a favor. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who understands that sometimes the best solution isn't the most high-tech one, but the one that works right here, right now.